Thank you everybody for joining tonight's event, Onwards and Onward, under discussion, presented by the University of Michigan Press. I'm Haley Winkle. I'm associate editor here at the Press, and I'm really delighted to be working with this book series. We will be watching for audience questions throughout the event. If you are on Zoom, please submit your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom center of the screen. You can turn captions on or off using the live transcript button in Zoom at the bottom right side of the screen. We will be recording this event this evening, and we'll post it on our YouTube page later this week. With us tonight, we have Georgia A. Popoff from Syracuse, New York. She is the YMCA of CNY's Downtown Writers Center Workshops Coordinator and faculty member, editor/book coach, and former Comstock Review Senior Editor and Under Discussion Series Editor here for University of Michigan Press. Her most recent poetry collection is Psychometry, published by Tiger Bark Press in 2019. She was recently named Poet Laureate of Onondaga County, New York. For more information, you can visit her website at www.georgiapopoff.com. We also have Derek Pollard here with us. He is a widely published poet and book critic, longtime educator and workshop leader, and founder of Constellar Creative, a creative agency that specializes in content marketing and copywriting. He also serves as the Poets on Poetry series editor for the University of Michigan Press. Martha Collins founded the creative writing program at University of Massachusetts, Boston, and for 10 years was Pauline Delaney Professor of Creative Writing at Oberlin College. She is the author of 11 poetry collections. And lastly, we have Celia Bland. She is the author of 3 collections of poetry, most recently Cherokee Roadkill, and a faculty associate and administrator at the Bard College Institute for Writing and Thinking. Formerly, she was writer in residence at the Written Arts program at Bard College. Thank you everybody for joining. I would love to start off by talking about the history of the series. Georgia, would you like to talk a little bit about the history of the series and what your vision for the series is as our new series editor for it?
Oh, thanks, Haley. I'm probably the newbie about the historical background, but I do understand the import of it. And I acknowledge that it's such an honor to be in the lineage of the editors, in Donald Hall starting the 3 series, and all the years since then, of course, Marilyn Hacker, Annie Finch, Kazuma Reeve, and now my colleagues, my colleagues Derek Pollard and Jay Perini, and I'm so glad that I could work with you and Elizabeth in bringing the series that I'm working with forward again. So it's been, we've got Derek and Martha and Celia were the last 2 books in the series. And now my view is, how can we broaden our concept of who wants to read these books about poets? Certainly within academia, for both undergrad and graduate school, the whole series of Under Discussion has been a significant force in the carrying forth the craft and the history of American letters. But now we've got the opportunity to look at a wider audience of not just professors and students, but people in community and other writers. Poets like to talk about poetry with each other, go figure. And these books can really add to that conversation, but also keep a history. And so what I'm looking forward to in my being involved is to see who are the people who haven't had those good conversations brought forth yet. Who are the people who are really probably well known and making significant contributions, but no one's written a book about them yet. And particularly looking at a stronger diversity of voices and representation. So my other concern is that of the elders, who we want to be able to acknowledge them while they have the ability to be acknowledged. There are a lot of poets who are in their older years who are still active, still writing, and there's never been anything about them. And those are the people I'm looking for, opportunities to bring books into the world about them.
Thank you. Do you have a dream poet or multiple poets about whom you'd like to have a book in the series?
The list is long.
I can imagine.
but it's funny. I'll talk, like the other day I was talking with Celia and Martha. I said, "Hey, okay, these are some of the people I've got in mind. We've got some really wonderful projects that are kind of picking up steam now and getting past calls so that we can submit the proposals. But the one that I think I'm most excited about that's coming together right now is a book on Sharon Olds by students of Sharon's. And where do we start? I'd like to find somebody, I was saying, who knows the work of Rina Espaillat and will bring her work to the world. Acknowledging her work. Her work's out there, and she's still out there herself. She just read for the Downtown Writers Center, I think, a year and a half ago. But there needs to be a conversation about her work. And there's a lot of people like that. M. Scott Momaday. I don't think there's a book out about M. Scott Momaday. We've got I've got a long list, but I want to keep them kind of close until we're a little more public about it. But I'll take ideas. People can just contact me with ideas they've got.
What was the drive for the books that you've chosen to bring to the press, and why was it important to the poetry community?
Well, just what I said, the ones we're working on now are all poets who have had either a significant impact on the poets that they have fostered themselves and the work that they've written, but also maybe were parts of communities that need to be captured too within the history, who have like inside views of different schools. Like what was happening in 1965 in Lower Manhattan. That I'm interested in those kinds of books too, that show us, a poet's view of a community of poets at a particular time and place. And we've got one of those cooking.
It's very exciting to hear. Here's a question for all of our panelists. What does it mean to be a poet writing about another poet? And what does it mean to have multiple people writing about a poet?
If you don't mind. And I think that this speaks to, Georgia, some of the things that you have been talking about in terms of the series. I know it's certainly been my experience. And one of the reasons that it's such an honor to be, as you had said, among the prior editors of these series, is that these books and these series have been instrumental in the development of so many people's poetry and poetics. And I know certainly in the case of Donald Ravel, whose work is the subject of the book that I edited, it just felt imperative to celebrate the legacy. And Georgia, I think you've said this very well. While the poet is in a position to be present to those celebrations, I can't help but think, considering the news is still so recent and the loss still so large, the contributions over the course of his writing career that Charles Simic made to the Poets on Poetry series and the book honoring his work in the Under Discussion series. A poet you and I both know quite well, Phil Memmer, once introduced Charles Simic at a reading, both by acknowledging and apologizing for the hold that Simic had and continues to have, and I think will continue to have, simply by virtue of the depth and the profundity of his work. The moment that you read Charles Simic for the first time is the moment at which you find yourself trying desperately to move past imitation, to be able to incorporate that voice into your own work. And I think that that's one of the things that the writers who have been subject to the careful, critical attention, but also in the case of Under Discussion, that wild enthusiasm about the work has resonated and continues to resonate. And I know you've had this experience. I know, Martha and Celia, you'll be able to speak to this as well. Certainly in my capacity as editor of Poets on Poetry series, almost to a person, the people that I talk to, the authors whose books are coming out, the prospective authors with whom I'm in discussions, they point to multiple titles in both of these series as being transformative for them. And I think that that's one of the ways in which these books continue to take shape, and why they matter so much, because there's such a passionate discourse. And that may be something that we touch upon later in our conversation as we think about the ways in which poets writing about poetry perhaps differ from people who identify as, say, scholars or academic critics writing about poetry.
I know that this series has had an impact in academia, and and both of these series, also the Poets on Poetry. And one fortunate thing is that these books have been in libraries, which is great. But I did not come upon these books as an academic, although I was an academic. I came upon these books as a poet. And everybody I know who knows these books knows them as a poet. And so it's just important to me that they are books of poets writing about poets. Almost everyone in our anthology on Jane Cooper is a poet. One of the people brought in a critic to work with him. But basically, they are poets writing about poetry. And it's a very different thing to hear from poets than it is to hear from literary critics who are looking at things from the outside. And the books have been very important to me for that reason. I think it's lovely that for the Donald Revel book, Derek, and also for the books you're thinking about, Georgia, to have these things come out while people are still alive. That wasn't our experience. Celia and I got to know each other shortly after the death of Jane Cooper in 2007. We were on a couple of panels and memorials, one at the AWP and one in New York together, and started chatting about gosh, was there something we could do to put a book like this together? And so our interest in the series was not trying to find a subject for the series, but rather having one and then finding the series to go with it.
Yeah, I think we both felt so passionate about bringing Jane Cooper's work as a poet under critical observation, that she was quite well known as a teacher, a brilliant teacher. Some of her students were Alice Walker, Cynthia MacDonald, Marie Howe. And she was known as a poet's poet, certainly, but to bring her work to a larger community, to commit to considering her oeuvre, all of the work that she published, and having that in one volume was such both a pleasure and a privilege, I think. She was herself so interested in her work as a whole. She again and again in her publications, her collection, she reconsidered her work. She would unearth, or as she said, reclaim work that she put aside during different times of her life because she considered it not worthy of public view, public reading, of attention. And then she would put them in her collections for reconsideration, to have poets who understand that impulse, both to be read and not to be read, I think was very important. The kind of sensitivity that poets bring to that, and also the appreciation for this work that had been pushed aside, forgotten about, quite literally forgotten about, by Jane herself. That our collection, I think, was able to consider all of her publications and to address that issue in particular as both a poet's consideration and a feminist issue. Why had she put it aside? Why did she choose to bring it before the world's eyes? So it was as I said, it was such a remarkable experience for both of us. And we were so excited to be able to further what Jane was herself working on.
I'd like to add too, as editor in the series, I have that same enthusiasm. And I know Derek does. I mean, the projects that we want to suggest for publication are ones that have us very excited and also meet, you know, our goals and our hopes for the people who are important to us that we know are important to other people. And you know, if I'm not excited about something, how can I invest the time that it takes to make it come into the world? But those things that I can be really thrilled about, I consider this such an honor to be in this position, because I can be of service to poets by helping some of these books come into the world, just by virtue of who I can petition and who I know and who comes to the press. But I can be a part of that service to our community, and that just thrills me that I've been given that honor.
Very well put. Derek, did you have something to say?
Well, I just wanted to speak to the point that Martha and Celia made about that sense of honoring really a legacy, and sharing that among a wider community. I think that really is one of the great impulses that motivates the series, and the interesting conversation that the books create when set alongside one another, right? The ways in which not only in each individual volume we have poets in conversation, writers in conversation about work, again, that is news that stays news, right? To be introduced to a poet such as Jane, right? Through the medium of that book and the impetus behind it. And I think that this is one of the things that the books in the Under Discussion series have always done an incredible job with. And I'm very, very interested to see the ways in which this continues to evolve as the series grows. But the ways in which the books introduce people, either to a poet they're unfamiliar with, or to a poet they think they know, but haven't had a chance to examine through the lens of that same sort of passionate embrace. I think I may have mentioned this in our last conversation, but it's something that Donald Ravel mentions in his book, The Art of Attention, that has always stuck with me, that close reading is close loving. And I think that is a pervasive theme in these books, the ways in which the editors are able to bring together writers who are able to bring that critical acumen to a passionate embrace of the work they're writing about. And I think that comes through in every one of these volumes. I think that sense of honoring a legacy, of contributing to a project, a trajectory of work, is written throughout each of these books and throughout the whole series. And again, I don't know as Jane's work and Don's work would necessarily come into conversation in the same way that it does, because of what we've been able to add under the rubric of the Under Discussion series. And I think that too is an incredible opportunity, particularly for people who have projects that they're thinking of perhaps bringing to you, Georgia.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to follow up with a little comment. I love the quote, "Close reading is close loving." A number of the essays in our book had been published before in the Field Symposium. I was an editor for Field magazine, and they focused on a single poem. But we found other people who we hadn't told what to do, also doing that kind of close reading that is not a scholarly close reading, but a loving close reading. And so there are many discussions of individual poems and feeling that poem just being wonderfully embraced by the writer. Thank you for that quote.
That also stuck out to me. I'll remember that one. Here's a question for all of you. What was your process as editors for volumes of Under Discussion books, and what did you discover in that process? Can you describe your commitment to the project?
Well, let me start with our process, and then I'll let Celia take over. As I said, Celia and I had talked about wanting to do something, and Kazim Ali had replaced me at Oberlin College and was somebody I'd gotten to know, and he loved Jane Cooper. In the last years of her life, he was writing letters to her, which I was reading to her. And at an AWP, we'd been in correspondence about the Jean Valentine volume, by the way, and both Celia and I appear in that Under Discussion volume. But I talked to Kazim at the AWP, and he and Marilyn Hacker were the editors of both the Under Discussion and Poets and Poetry series. And he said, oh, I think we'd really love to do that. And then I chatted with Marilyn. And this was some years after Celia and I had talked about it. And so I wrote to Celia and I said, are you still interested? And by almost return mail, I not only got yes, but here's a list of people we might ask. And then we took it from there. And it's been really exciting preparing for this, just looking back at those emails. I'll let Celia take over at that point.
Thank you. And please, Martha, just jump in if there's anything I forget. But as far as the commitment to the project, we had that. We had a number of people who we knew would be chomping at the bit to write about Jane's work. They loved her work. And others who would like to view her work through the prism of knowing her life, and knowing her wisdom as a teacher, because she certainly was a woman of letters, and truly, I would call her a gentlewoman. You know, she was such a kind, upstanding person. But we also brought in poets who did not know her, some of whom knew her work well, some who knew her work less well. And that was very fruitful, I think, to have that perspective from these younger writers, younger poets. And also, we went to the New York Public Library, which has an archive of her work, and we found within her papers a review of her first book that was to have been published in the New York Times, written by James Wright, which was never published. And so it was exciting to bring that into the world at last, and to read from James Wright as an early supporter of her work. He was an eternal supporter of her work, but just at the very beginning of her career, to see what he had to say. And also a very beautiful introduction by Galway Connell, who was a beloved colleague of Jane's. That was delivered at the Donnell Library celebration of Jane's work that had never been published. That is like a mini essay. It's just so appreciative, so thoughtful, and so insightful. So we were able to proceed in perhaps the more traditional way, but also we had these discoveries, which were very exciting.
Just another word on that. We did have this list of people. There were really kind of three sources. One was the list of people. Another was things we found unpublished, as Celia said, and also published reviews. And some of the reviews we also found in the New York Public Library. Some of them I had because I'm Jane's literary representative. So we had those two things, asking people, not telling them what to do, and finding things. And then we discovered that we had gaps. And that's when we began asking people specifically to fill in those gaps. And some of those things were quite exciting. They weren't all, the people we asked weren't all younger. One was my very dear friend, Lee Sharkey, who had written a lot about Rosa Luxemburg. And Jane has a wonderful sequence of poems called Threads that had been published as a chapbook. And Lee was very excited about pursuing this. And it was sort of interesting. She writes as a poet, but there is also original scholarship in that piece because she went back to Rosa Luxemburg's prison diaries, on which Jane had based a lot of this work, and did this comparative study, which nobody had ever thought to do before. We also didn't have anybody writing about a very major work about Willa Cather, and invited Kevin Proofer to take that on. And he collaborated, as it turned out, with a colleague who was a Cather scholar, who is perhaps the only person in the anthology who is not a poet. But that combination of finding things, looking for things, finding people, and then filling in what else we needed. And of course, in this process, an endless back and forth between Celia and me, each of us proofing each essay, discovering that there were repetitions that we had to address in talking to the poets. It was really exciting. We worked very well together, and all of this, of course, is by email, except for visits to the New York Public Library.
And Derek, what was your process like?
Yeah, I would love to be able to say that I had this idea for this book and reached out to a couple of people, and a few months later had a manuscript ready to submit. And there's some truth to that. It was a much longer process. The idea came to me, and came to me in close collaboration. And so I love hearing that story, Martha and Celia, of the ways in which this project brought you even closer together, right? I mean, what a wonderful endeavor to embark upon. One of the contributors for the book on Don Ravel's work, Peter Covino, and I were talking about this project many, many years ago when we were both still in graduate school together and when we were both working with Don at the University of Utah. Various projects intervened, various opportunities in many years. I think Peter and I both were convinced that somebody else would take up this project before we were able to move forward with it ourselves. And the years went by, and I felt compelled to reach out to Peter again. Nobody had written the book that we were convinced someone would write before us. And Peter was not able to join me in an editorial capacity at the time due to all of his other obligations, both in terms of his teaching and his work with Barrow Street. But he gave me his blessing. He committed to writing an essay. And as has always been true of the two of us, he too provided some suggestions of people for me to follow up with, many of whom were already on my list. The easy part of this project for me was simply communicating the project to the people who I was interested in having contribute, all of whom simply said yes, with a few exceptions who circumstances gave us to understand were unable to commit, who remained ardent supporters of the project and were dear friends throughout the whole process. I'm thinking particularly of Jim Longenbach, who passed away. And I'm thinking of Forrest Gander, whose obligations took him elsewhere at the time. They were both incredibly, incredibly passionate about the project. And I think both wanted to give everything that they could in support of it. Everyone else said yes. And I really left it at that with them. I didn't find it was necessary for me to really give much direction. There were cases, of course, where prospective authors, contributors, would get back to me and ask some questions in terms of coordinating. I know, Martha, you had spoken about this in terms of sort of coordinating overlap, making sure that, say, two poets weren't devoting an entire essay to a single work. Although that does happen in the collection, I think it creates a very interesting spark because they're both looking at it from different perspectives, and it isn't the primary focus of the given essays in question. I was able to bring together, and this is another aspect of the Under Discussion series that I've always found so intriguing and so rewarding. Again, as somebody who came to the series first as a reader, as a poet who, Martha, you had said this, found myself captivated by the conversations that were going on in these books. I've always appreciated the fact, certainly this was true for when we were putting this book together, that there's a section that's devoted to interviews, to reviews, to conversations, so that there's a blend of formats. And I've always found that incredibly intriguing. I can't tell you how easy it was to get permissions from the reviewers and the interviewers who I reached out to. And then the people who were commissioned to write individual essays managed to complete each of their projects prior to deadline. And it gave me the opportunity then to go back and do the work, Martha and Celia, you were talking about, of really seaming together the manuscript. The architecture, that process really involved me doing what we do as poets, which I think is such an interesting way to think about putting together a book of critical work like this. In many cases, I laid the essays out, the printed pages of them, and moved them as I would a manuscript of poems, and found the thread of the conversation, which led me to begin with Marianne Salmon's essay. And Celia, I believe you had mentioned the word appreciation earlier. I think that is also such a wonderful facet of these books. Marianne's essay is an appreciation of Don's work and frames it so well. The same is true of the last essay in that section of the book by Rebecca Lindenberg, which is more in the way of a personal narrative, but also is couched as a deep appreciation and a close reading of Don's work. And that allowed me to really put together the discussion that was happening in the book. And the same was true for the interviews and reviews. I wanted to make sure that there was a sequence, that this wasn't just a collection of essays, interviews, reviews, but that this was a sustained conversation that was taking place between poets, many of whom hadn't had a chance to see before what the others were doing. And I'm always amazed when I go back and look at the book at how tightly woven that conversation is without that being intended at the start.
Thank you all. Here's a question for Georgia. In previous years, this series was aimed primarily at an academic audience. And I would love to hear about the perspective that you bring as a poet and how that might differ or resemble previous editors' points of view.
Once every Zoom, you got to forget. I've done my work far outside of academia, so I've been involved in communities of poets that either are students at the Downtown Writers Center over the last 22 years, or people I met during the early days of SLAM. Um, and I'm really cognizant of the fact that not everybody goes to school for poetry, but they learn how to write poetry well. And the way they learn it, Miriam Sagan's beautiful book, The Unbroken Line, approaches poetry as something that is like an artisan craft that's taught from teacher to student, student to teacher. And so when I'm thinking about, like, these books are great for us as poets, and as Derek said, and Martha's mentioned as well, is that so many people have books from both series on their shelves because they were the books that they read to learn how to be better poets or how to be in community with poets. And then there may be somebody who is a retiree who finally has the time to write and is no longer working as an engineer, but they're taking their writing seriously. That person, these books get to. Young people who are just, or young writers who are just eager to know anything. We all know that phase of give me as much as you can so I can soak it up. Let me be the sponge. And hopefully most of us still are, because I completely go by the point of that. I'll never know everything there is to know about poetry, but I'm really love when I get delighted by someone. And there's so many people out there to delight us. So I just see that, a broad scope of people who were interested in these books and will continue to be interested in these books, because we will be bringing books of value to them for however they may be taking them in. And that when we can, it also serves to keep poets with us when we lose them. That being close to them. I did a project for another press, and I felt so close to the poet because I was editing this collection of how people felt about her. That just like morning conversations with the poet while I'm editing essays. It was a wonderful thing. So I think that we've got a lot of opportunity here for people to continue to want these books and to cherish them. Everyone I know who's got them cherishes them. That's really something. And that's a lineage that is really remarkable. And Martha, you go deep into some of that history. And so it's also great to be in contact with you today to see what else we can do, right?
Let me just say one thing. I do not have an MFA. And I recently was answering some interview questions. Somebody's doing one of those things with me. And I had to say, what did I do? And in the beginning years, when I was a kind of closet poet, I read things like these books. Mm-hmm. So even as I say, you think of it as being an academic series, but it extended beyond that way back then.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that you don't need an MFA to be a poet. It's become super important to a lot of people now, but I don't have that either. I don't have initials after my name, but I certainly have a bunch of books in print, and I certainly love poetry. So, just keep moving forward. Like, I think that's the most encouraging thing too that we can do, is be there for people who feel that they're not going to be able to fulfill their own hopes as poets because they don't have particular credentials. All it takes is to sit down and write the poem and love the work. And just one more thing, Derek. People at the Writers Center who, like, a couple years into taking classes, go, "Wow, I never realized that writing was so much work." And I go, "Yeah, it is, but it's joyous work."
Well, and I was just very quickly going to say, I think you had talked about service earlier. I think one of the great services that these series do is they provide a living curriculum. right? That we're able to make accessible so that everyone passionate, whether they identify as writers, as readers, as poets, as artists, right, as musicians, as electricians, there's such a welcome in these series, and there's so much possibility. And I think each one of these volumes underscores both the discipline and the dedication required to truly write the poems that are going to speak to people. At the same time, as you say, that the joyousness, getting back, Celia, to what you had said earlier, that deep-seated appreciation for this expression that, when it's done well, transports us. And I think that there's something extraordinary about that each of us connects with. And I think that over the course of the history of Under Discussion, of Poets on Poetry, of Writers on Writing, there are books available already. And I'm excited that there are going to be even more of them going forward, that each reader is going to find resonates. And they're going to be different for every single reader. And I think that that's such a wonderful opportunity to be able to engage with writers, with writing, in a space that is at once safe, the conversation is happening, but equally challenging and demanding and rigorous in ways that inspire people to continue this art form that all of us are so deeply invested in. And I just think it's a wonderful way for University of Michigan Press and for each of these three series to give back and to open up an even wider and broader channel so that we do hear more voices and become introduced to those legacies that may have been set aside, writers who may have been underappreciated, writers who may have garnered tremendous attention earlier in their careers, who have, over the course of the intervening decades, perhaps lost that readership. We have an opportunity to make sure that their work continues and we're able to bring more and more people to it. And I couldn't agree with each of you more. That is such a pleasure and a privilege to be involved in doing.
Thank you, Derek. In considering moving the series moving forward rather, how do we examine the differences between the poet and the literary critic in discussing the craft of poetry and the work of poets?
My first thought is no 5-syllable words. I say that kind of facetiously, but I think that poets, when they're talking about poetry for books like this, inherently write like poets who know what they're talking about. And from, as Martha said, from the inside out, there's a lot of ways to discuss poetry that becomes heavy and burdensome in a way, in just its language and syntax. I'm looking for books that are really readable as well as have content, but that maybe, especially, I guess I'm really conscious too of the fact that people don't read like they used to. And so being able to have something that the current reader can approach and immerse in maybe shorter spans of time, or in different methods, like now looking at the digital age and how is that changing publishing and how is that changing our series. Do we want to listen to a book as well as have it on the print? I love to hold a book in my hands, but some people do better with listening, or they might do better if it's on a screen, if they can carry it with them further or something. I don't know, there's lots of ways for approaching. But for me, I prefer the conversation of poets to the conversation of literary critics. Maybe that's because I'm not familiar with that that style of writing as much. And so that's my long-winded reason for saying no five syllable words, although some of them are marvelous.
Well, I think part of this too, and again, this is speaking in as one of your colleagues at the press. I just think it's really important to listen, and then to listen outward. The people who are reading these books, who value them, who cherish them in the ways that you were speaking of, and that I myself do, what do those people want from these books? How can we deliver those conversations, very much plural, in ways that are going to resonate with them? How can we honor not just the poets, the writers, but also the readers of these series who have supported them over the decades and who have made them as instrumental as they are in the contemporary poetry landscape? And not just here in the United States, right? I mean, these are international series, which is another component that I know that we're dedicated to exploring, right? Is reaching out and making sure that we're being much more representative of global literatures, again, very much plural, so that we're able to honor the readers who are coming to the series, as well as the writers about whom so much of this work is being produced.
You know, I have a friend who's an environmental engineer who's very much she's an avid reader. She's in 3 book clubs. We subscribe to the big lecture series, author lecture series here in Syracuse. And she's very much a patron of the Downtown Writers Center in donations and attendance to our readings. And people always ask her at the reading, oh, so what do you write? Why are you here? And she says, I'm here because I read and I listen and I love poetry. You know, that the assumption that everybody at a poetry reading is there because they are other poets is not necessarily the case. We may outnumber a lot of the people, but there are readers who just thrive on poetry. And it used to be so much more a part of daily life. You know, I think that's one of the things that Robert Pinsky discovered when he started the Favorite Poem Project many years ago was, well, everybody's got a poem that they remember. And, you know, poetry used to be a form of family entertainment and education and so many things. Like, we can't assume that everybody reading the books are only interested because they write. Maybe they just really love poetry and love language and love reading and want to know more about it all. Those are people that we want to make sure we have something for them too, so that when they read a poem, whomever it is, they have a greater sense of what full infinite capacity of what poetry can be.
And I just wanted to point to the subtitle of our collection, Jane Cooper, Radiance of Attention. I think that what the poets writing about Jane's work practice was a kind of radiance of attention, that this is not, it is an appreciation of her work, certainly, but it's not a hagiographic collection. It is a critical work. Poets writing about poets are very aware not only of technical, prosody questions, but also questions of where did she succeed at something that she had been trying again and again? What fell short before? What succeeded later? Who might she have been in touch with, working with, showing her work to, reading, that might have influenced that? That's, I think, the difference perhaps between this sort of book, another difference. I mean, you've said many things that are so true, but another difference would be that the poets writing have no theory to prove. They are instead open to exploring the work, and from a place of tremendous expertise and tremendous sensitivity. So I think that makes these collections timeless in many ways.
Absolutely. Thank you. In our last 10 minutes or so, we have some audience questions. And this one looks like it's for Martha and Celia. Can you discuss how Jane Cooper enters the work of Cather and O'Keeffe in long poems and confronts moral and spiritual landscapes?
Well, I guess I would say something about the Cather and the Rosa Luxemburg, and it's really what we're saying about the poets that we have written that we have edited these volumes of. Jane immersed herself in the work of Willa Cather. She became such a close reader and close lover of Willa Cather's work. She knew it backwards and forwards and upside down, and wrote out of that. Not in the way that a literary critic would. The work is called Vocation, a Life, and it was her real comment on what it was to have the vocation of poet, of writer. But it was a thorough immersion for her. And so in some ways, I think what we did is very similar to what she did in immersing herself in the work of Cather and the work of Luxemburg and others.
And just one brief addendum to what Martha said so beautifully, I think, is that with the Cather, I know she was really intent, particularly on Song of the Lark, which is a less well-read, less often read Cather novel about an opera singer, and the way in which this young woman enacts a vocation, how she learns a vocation, was something I think Jane was particularly interested in as a poet and as a teacher. You know, that her feminist awakening, you know, as a powerful thinker, writer, civically engaged human being, was something that she was very aware had been embarked upon and accomplished in stages. And that was something that she wanted her students, I think, her readers, to know, that it wasn't something that was a decision that was made and accomplished overnight. I think Cather embodied that pioneer spirit in some ways, to keep going, no matter how difficult.
Just a tiny anecdote. I spent quite a bit of time with Jane in her last weeks, and she was very feeble and very ill. And I read to her a lot, and I read a lot of her own poetry to her. And when I read the long Willa Cather poem to her, she smiled and said, "I did what I wanted to do with that poem."
It's wonderful.
May we all be able to say something like that.
Absolutely. And how do you see Jane Cooper's reputation and place in American poetry now? And how well known and influential do you think that she is?
Okay, who knows? We hope that this volume did something. We should note that Jane's collected poems came out in 2000. She died in 2007. This volume came out in 2019. And there was a period before the collected poems came out from Norton where she wasn't very well known at all, except among poets. I think Celia saying that she was a poet's poet is really quite accurate. But I'm often surprised when I mention Jane Cooper that people know who she is and appreciate her. And I think that's going to last.
And I would say too that I've met a number of people who've read this book and said how much it meant to them, that it helped them contextualize her work in a very helpful way, I think. And certainly as more and more attention has been turned upon the work of her great friends, Adrienne Rich and Jean Valentine, that there's more appreciation of her work as well, not just as part of that triangle of great poets who shared work, but also as another sympathetic but very individual vision.
Absolutely. And our last question for the evening, also from the audience, has a bit of a backstory to it. I love those serendipitous moments when I am talking to a person and the subject of poetry comes up and we both discover that we love the same poets or poem. We break out our favorite lines and interesting tidbits about their lives or about our lives that their poems reveal. I know the individual volumes themselves are conversations about a poet, but can you talk about how the volumes create that kind of energy among themselves? In other words, how do the books in the series recreate that sense of delight and discovery by dint of their juxtaposition?
I've seen them out drinking together a number of times. I guess I like humor. I would say one thing to that is that as we continue to grow the community of poets that are represented, the books are already speaking to each other, but they'll continue to, and they'll carry on a conversation that changes as much as poetry changes and changes as much as poets change and language changes. People forget that the dictionary is a living document, for instance, but so is the draft of a poem. And even if it's in print, doesn't mean we're not going to change it. That's one of the things teaching a newer poet, that don't worry so much about when do I know it's done. But these books are done and they're there, and as the collection grows, I see just inherently they feed on each other a body of knowledge and a body of sentiment and intention that I keep going back and looking at the list and going, okay, so yeah, look at that. This is a fun puzzle to play with and make bigger. This is a fun conversation to expand. So I think I can't guarantee that that's the case, but it seems to me that just by how we will attract more to that community on the shelf, the more they'll have a chance to play drinking games together. And there's more for an individual poet to say, oh, well, here's the other thing, to trust the series. That if it's in the series, there's a reason why it's there. And to just there's a new book out from University of Michigan Press in either poets and on poetry and under discussion. Maybe I'll get it just because I know how good they are. That would be my hope.
Well, I think there are a couple of that. Celia, I think you said it so incredibly well. These books, much like that triangle of powerful poets sharing a sense of purpose, and yet each writing such a distinctive voice, and yet being part of that conversation. I think the books in this series and in Poets on Poetry do something similar. I think that when they're set in conversation with one another, new ways of looking at the work of a poet like Jane Cooper emerge as a result of this sort of environment that's created when you're reading one of Charles Simich's books, for instance, or the book in the series on Shahid Ali. Then to turn to your book on Jane Cooper's work enriches that entire project. It allows you to find a new context. The analogy that I've been thinking of this whole time is the jazz album in the liner note. And Georgia, I think your sense of sort of trusting the series is such an apt way of putting it. You buy a jazz album, right? This is certainly true when record stores were not a retro phenomenon. And those liner notes led you to another album, which in turn led you to another album. And you began to see patterns emerge. Maybe it was the producer, Norman Granz, for instance. Maybe it was one of the members of the rhythm section who was leading a band or was working on another project. I think something very similar is happening with the books in these series, in that you're able to go from one to another because, by virtue of the fact that they're part of the series, you can trust there's going to be value. There are going to be epiphanies for you, whether you're a reader or a writer or both. And invariably, just as you yourself said, you're going to be curious about what else is in that catalog. And you may wind up reading a book that very few other people would have read after the one you just put down. And what interesting opportunities exist in those moments, right? What rich, what profound readings emerge in situations like that. And I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for all of us, readers, writers, editors, members of the extraordinary team here at the Press. It's an incredible opportunity for us to continue to create those unexpected moments of synchronicity or serendipity.
I think we will also start to continue to watch how the interconnections. So one book about one poet might also talk about how they were directly related to other poets who may be in the series or will come in the series, and we'll start to watch the history of communities. You know, like just by virtue of who knew whom, who was in salons together, who were in classrooms together, who were having dinners together and talk about their work. That's another thing that I think we'll see as they grow. And that's why I like the anthology idea, because that happens too. You get all these people who have a different view of the individual poet, but each of them gives a sense of how large those individuals were in their work and in their scope and in their direct impact on humans. Poetry it is true that it's essential. It is not a luxury. It's one of the threads of the warp of society for countless generations, for millennia. And we can do a little part of keeping that fabric intact and ever growing.
Thank you all. And thank you everybody for tuning in this evening. And thank you especially to Georgia, Derek, Martha, and Celia for such a wonderful conversation. Georgia, I think I could listen to you talk about poetry and community for hours. I love that. We will be posting a recording of this event to our YouTube channel. And during the month of January, you can also take 40% off of all books in the Under Discussion series using the discount code UMUD on our website. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Good night, all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure.